Hey everyone, this is Ty the TV Guy, and today I'm going to be taking you through my top 10 episodes of Rick and Morty. I'm super excited to share this with you guys, and it took a lot of rewatching and thought to make the most accurate list for my taste and what I see as cream of the crop for Rick and Morty. I want to get right into this, and the first step is listing my honorable mentions. I had to bring 5 to the table that didn't quite make the cut, so here's the honorable mentions in no order. Mort Dinner Rick Andre, the premiere episode of Season 5, Rick Mirai Jack, the closing episode of Season 5, Lawnmower Dogs, Season 1, Episode 2, Season 4, Episode 6, Never Ricking Morty, and the conclusion of Season 7, the most recent season, Fear No Mort. These episodes have amazing plots, but either aren't quite as exciting or well-rounded as the episodes in my top 10, in my opinion. Before I reveal my top 10 episodes, leave a like on this video and be sure to smash that subscribe button, as I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers by the end of the year and it helps out more than you know. Alright, now at number 10, I have the Ricklantis Mixup. This fan favorite and critically acclaimed episode is actually the highest rated on IMDb, which gives it a lofty appraisal at 9.8 out of 10. I certainly love this episode as well, but ultimately, I come to Rick and Morty for two main things. A ridiculously complex and intriguing plot, which this episode builds upon better than any other perhaps, and the other thing I look for is that classic unhinged Rick and Morty humor, which there isn't as much of in this episode. So, from a technical standpoint, there's really no gripe I have with this episode. The details revealed about the rebuilding of the Citadel and the new reign of Evil Morty as president are very interesting and add to the Rick and Morty lore, as this universe gets deeper and more complex than we ever thought it would before this. And not only that, but there's also a lot of social commentary in this episode. Everything from police brutality, violence against your own kind, Morty on Morty violence, for example, government corruption, and much more is explored in this episode. It's really an incredible episode to expand the scope of the show, and I appreciate how it develops the mystique around one of the show's best characters, Evil Morty. At number 9, I have Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. This is another episode that explores the lore of Rick and Morty, serving as our introduction to who we come to know as Evil Morty. The main plot of the episode revolves around Rick C-137 being wanted for the murder of 27 Ricks by the Council of Ricks. Ugh, sorry, that's a lot of Ricks, I know. But along this journey to face the Rick that has seemingly framed him, our Rick loses the respect of our Morty, as Morty believes he's merely being used by Rick as a protective tool, not that he's actually valued or loved as a grandchild. Feeling rebellious, Morty leads a group of captive Mortys against the Rick in control, and the Mortys ultimately kill that Rick and free our Rick, Rick C-137. The big reveal is that the whole situation was orchestrated by Evil Morty, which was revealed to us in a chilling scene as the episode came to a close. The payoff for the events that occur in this episode doesn't fully come until Season 5's finale, where we learn that Evil Morty already had a great amount of intel on Rick C-137, which he obtained all the way back in this great Season 1 episode. It's a little complex, I know, but trust me when I say it's a super satisfying episode with an amazing storyline, and after rewatch I knew it had to be in my top 10. At number 8, I have Total Rickall, a classic Rick and Morty episode in what I believe to be the most stacked season in the show, Season 2. This is also a fan favorite and a popular answer as the best episode in the show, and I certainly think it lives up to the hype. From the quirky characters to the ever-unique storyline, I love everything about this episode, and it comes to a great climactic moment when Beth unfortunately shoots Mr. Poopy Butthole, thinking he's a parasite, and it starts his run as one of the most charismatic and lovable side characters in the show. This episode doesn't have any major repercussions, but it's truly just the definition of fun when it comes to this show. At number 7, I have A Rickall in Time, Season 2's premiere episode. This is one of the couple Season 2 episodes that I think should get much more love than it does. First of all, this episode is absolutely hilarious. I think in terms of Rick's humor and his punchlines, this might be the best of the best. There's some laugh-out-loud worthy lines as he scolds Morty and Summer in the garage, including, "What do you two have to be so uncertain about? What zit ointment to use? What chair to sit in while I do everything?" And then there's this one.
"And I honestly can't even tell the two of you apart half the time because I don't go by height or age. I go by amount of pain in my ass, which makes you both identical."
Aside from the comedy, the storyline is great as well, as the action of freezing time for an extended period of time has quite the fallout for our characters. After not too long, the uncertainty of the group ends up splitting their realities into too many to count, and it takes some heroics from Rick to save the day and save himself in the end. I loved the concept of this episode, as once again, I feel like I'm not getting writing this exciting in many other places on television. Rick is as exciting as ever in this one, and I definitely think it's an amazing watch for a new Rick and Morty viewer. At number 6, I have the other criminally underrated Season 2 episode, Look Who's Purging Now. I'll be honest, I've watched some videos where other creators ranked every episode in this show, and I never understand why this one is so low. Now, this episode has no bearing on the lore of Rick and Morty and does nothing to expand the show's universe, but that's the case for at least 70 or 80% of the show's episodes. The writers have often spoken about how they largely like to keep it as an episodic experience, so this episode not contributing to the overall canon shouldn't make it an automatic average episode in my opinion. This episode is pure entertainment and exactly what I come to Rick and Morty for. There's high quality comedy, a plethora of plot twists, savage moments from both Rick and Morty, memorable single episode characters that contribute well to its plot, and even a special reveal at the end of the episode. Morty is absolutely hilarious in this episode, as he starts to take the purge a bit too seriously and goes off the rails a bit. I also like this from a different standpoint though, as it kind of reversed his role with Rick. Because for once, Rick had to be the cool, calm, and collected character between the two of them. If you want 20 plus minutes of thrilling entertainment and well-written comedy, this episode is one of the best Rick and Morty has to offer in my opinion. At number 5, I have UNM Ricken, the only episode from the last few seasons to crack my top 10. Though I think the show has become much less consistent and overall less captivating in these last few seasons, this episode breaks that mold. For a while now, Rick C-137 has been obsessively searching for Prime Rick, the version of himself responsible for killing his wife. Our Rick also seemingly has a distaste for him because up until this point, Rick Prime has been one of the only people in the universe that outsmarted him. The other person to do so, Evil Morty, shows up during Rick's hunt for Rick Prime due to a disturbance that he notices from outside the central finite curve. The whole story of this episode and of the events leading up to it would be too much to explain, but essentially, Rick's showdown with Rick Prime ends up being one of the best fight scenes in the entire show, and certainly the most meaningful one. The stakes feel higher than ever for Rick, as his quest to avenge the death of his wife across the multiverse comes to a head. In the end, Rick ends up killing Rick Prime, but I wouldn't necessarily say he gets his revenge. Well, at least not in the way he had hoped. Evil Morty ends up deceiving Rick Prime and locking him up for Rick to kill, doing most of the legwork to take down Rick Prime. After a long, strenuous pursuit of his enemy, Rick essentially gets handed the revenge he had wanted for so long. Thinking this would bring him some type of happiness or fulfillment, Rick is left empty and unsatisfied after killing Rick Prime. The doom that follows this episode is almost unparalleled elsewhere in the show, and the emptiness that Rick feels in the closing scenes is palpable. Though Rick achieved the goal of his mission, he's still left feeling defeated afterward. This feeds into a long-standing theme of the show, which shows Rick struggling to find a purpose and denying that he even needs one, even though it seems as if he has the desire for purpose at some points. This episode isn't as polished as some in my opinion, but it brings multiple long-standing plot points within the canon of Rick and Morty to a climactic moment, which merits its top 5 spot for me. Coming in at number 4, I have the Ricks Must Be Crazy. This is an episode with an airtight story that spans multiple microverses, or miniverses. Rick creates a microverse within his car battery that solely serves the purpose of powering his car battery and other electronics. However, Rick gives the organisms within his car battery's universe sentience, meaning they can think and feel. Naturally, the people within the microverse start to grow and adapt, and they eventually realize they no longer need to utilize the mechanism that Rick put within their world to provide power for themselves. Rick realizes this, and through his interactions with the lead scientist of the microverse, he comes to know that the very scientist that he created also created a microverse, which he calls a miniverse, that follows the exact same concept as Rick's. This episode points out some existential questions. Are we real? Is life real? Do I have a meaning or purpose? Am I alone in this universe? You get the picture. These are questions that often drive people insane, especially those with supreme intelligence, as we come to see in this outstanding episode. Other themes are highlighted as well, such as the fact that people will believe anything they are told by figures of authority, and people will never be satisfied with how things currently are. The interest in progressing and developing new technology to make life easier as we perceive it is inevitable. In other notes, the humor is witty and well thought out, the struggle for superiority is real among the geniuses, and the plot is just so original. Once again, I come to the show for original and exciting episode plots as well as clever comedy, and I get a perfectly executed blend of that in this Season 2 masterpiece. Entering the top 3, I have my 5th and final entry from Season 2, which is the Wedding Squanchers. Clearly, Season 2 is my favorite, and this season finale also plays as my favorite finale in the series. In this episode, Rick is forced by his family to attend the wedding of Tammy, Summer's high school friend, and Bird Person, Rick's best friend. Calling marriage a sham, Rick is basically dragged to the space wedding and even continues his defiance once he arrives there. Eventually, with the help of some alcohol, Rick comes to support his friend and wishes him well in his marriage despite some of his doubts. He even gives a heartfelt speech on stage in his drunken stupor in lovable Rick Sanchez fashion. However, it turns out Rick's reservations about this wedding were actually correct. In a surprising turn of events, Tammy ends up being a prominent figure of the Galactic Federation, who is chasing Rick as one of their most wanted individuals in the galaxy. After this reveal, all hell breaks loose at the wedding venue, and with the help of the family and a few friends, especially good old Squanchy, Rick and the family are able to escape in a spaceship. However, Rick soon realizes that running isn't going to work. In order to protect his family and return their life as close to normalcy as possible, he turns himself into the Galactic Federation to guarantee the health and freedom of his family. For a character that's largely painted as a narcissistic, selfish, and heartless guy, it was a character-defining moment for sure. Though Ricks are supposed to not care about Mortys and their families in general according to many of the Ricks that interact in this show, our Rick shows flashes of breaking that stereotype. Rick's nihilism is almost always prevalent, but in this case, he seems to care what happens to his family, which once again gives us a glimpse into his humanity. So, I have this episode at 3 because I love the unsuspecting build-up, which quickly, drastically shifts to a high-intensity shootout and manhunt for Rick, which ends up having immense consequences for everyone involved. The element of surprise, the action, the heart, and the character depth added to Rick in this episode is just some of what makes it one of the best episodes Rick and Morty has ever had. Not to mention, some of the comedy in this episode is just so absurd, and I don't even know how anyone could come up with it. A planet where everything is on a cob? That actually sent me for no reason the first time I watched it. Like, I was thinking about that for days. But yeah, another masterful episode for this show, combining all the elements I love it for once again. As I enter my top 2, I want to clarify that this was the easiest part of my list. From the very beginning of the curation process, I knew which 2 episodes I would have at the top. Anyway, at number 2, I have the Rick Shank Rickdemption, Season 3's perfect premiere. Yes, I said perfect, and I mean it. This is undoubtedly one of my favorite episodes of television ever, as from start to finish, I am given an action-packed, mind-boggling, comedic goldmine along the journey of Rick's prison escape. Also, I want to give a nod to the episode title, which clearly pays homage to what happens to be my favorite movie ever, The Shawshank Redemption. So that gives this episode a bonus point for me as well. Anyway, back to the plot, where we start with Rick being interrogated by a Galactic Federation agent about the science behind the creation of his portal gun technology. Here we see a backstory of Rick and what seems to be a tragic story about his family. To escape and deceive the agent, Rick quote-unquote fabricates the story of the events that day in his garage. However, as we receive more intel into his backstory in future episodes, we've come to realize that these events were mostly true. The way I see it, Rick must have somewhat fabricated the story to evade the technology being used by the Galactic Federation to obtain intel on him, but his wife and Beth did really die that day in his garage, and we've come to learn his wife was killed in every reality that we know of. Of course, Beth is a main character in the show and is very much alive, which indicates our Rick no longer lives in the dimension he originated in. After Rick deceives the agent and manipulates the Federation's technology, he's able to transfer his consciousness multiple times on the way to a masterful escape. This sequence creates one of the best gag jokes in the show, as every time he completes a phase of the escape, he walks away and proclaims,
I'm gonna go take a shit.
Despite the craziness that precedes it, the very best scene is the standoff between Rick and one of the Ricks from the Council of Ricks near the end of the episode. The council member holds Rick C-137 Summer hostage for leverage. Morty steps in and presses Rick about being so selfish. Rick then scolds Morty for ruining his plan, and eventually, Morty's anger for Rick takes over, and he shoots him in a moment of immense rage. This moment shocked me as a viewer, but seconds later, our Rick shoots the council member holding Summer hostage. Ultimately, the plan works perfectly because Rick set Morty up with a prop gun to shoot at him in case there was a standoff. So Morty was really just following those instructions and didn't actually want to shoot Rick, right? Definitely. But yeah, that scene alone had about 4 twists, and it might be the single most entertaining scene in the history of the show for me. Across the whole episode, we get deep insight into canon events of the show, including Rick's tragic backstory. We also get relentless comedy and savage moments from Rick, and a series of events that both shocks you and makes you laugh as a viewer. Like I said, it's hard for me to enjoy an episode of television more than this one, but I think there's one that slightly edges it out for my number one spot. And number one, can you guess it? Any ideas? I'll give you a couple seconds. Well, it is the Vat of Acid episode, Season 4, Episode 8, and simply put, a masterpiece. This episode does everything. It highlights the power dynamic in Rick and Morty's relationship, as Rick always proves his superiority in the end. But we also see that Morty's opinion and criticisms matter to Rick when Morty doubts his ability to create a time travel type of device. For much of the episode, we follow Morty along a life-changing journey in which he falls in love, tragically gets in a plane crash and is left to die, and then eventually gets saved alongside his girlfriend by a search team. It was a very dramatic sequence that got me as emotional as any scene in Rick and Morty has. What we also learned from this scene and the invention of Rick's time travel device is that life would not be as valuable without consequences. Consequences make us who we are. Without them, nothing would matter. Nothing would have any meaning. Unfortunately for Morty, he learned his lesson about this time travel device the hard way, because after everything he went through to survive with his girlfriend, Jerry very fittingly mistakes the time travel remote for the one that operates the TV and resets time back to before Morty even ever met his girlfriend. She then thinks he's crazy and he no longer can be with her moving forward. At the end of the episode, Morty figures out that everything he did actually happened, and that the device Rick created wasn't as generic as the term time travel would make it seem. It more so split the realities of every situation Morty repeated, which means everything Morty did was real. He just got to split away and do it again. So it wasn't a real do-over, more so just doing it again, like I said. This reveal ties into the overarching story of the episode, as Morty's only option to evade the SWAT team and mob outside of his house is to hop into Rick's fake vat of acid. Rick teaches Morty multiple lessons in this episode, with the most prominent one being simply to never mock his inventiveness or creativity. Morty didn't like the vat of acid scheme at the beginning of the episode, but ended up having to rely on it to save himself from major harm near the end of the episode. It's truly a masterfully written storyline, and it's the best example of being amazed that this show can fit such a complex story arc into about 22 minutes. As always, this episode has its fair share of laughs, but it wasn't necessarily the type of laugh-out-loud humor you may get in other edgier episodes, perhaps. But it certainly feels like the most polished episode the Rick and Morty writers have crafted, and it serves as a model for how to write a short television episode and evoke every possible emotion along that journey. I find this to be the most rewatchable episode with one of the most clever conclusions and many lessons along the way, which is why it's my favorite episode of Rick and Morty. Well, that does it for my list of the top 10 Rick and Morty episodes. Let me know where you agreed and disagreed, and comment your favorite episode down below. Like I mentioned earlier, 5 of my top 10 episodes ended up coming from Season 2, which shocked me upon forming this list, and 2 came from Season 3. That really shows me that Rick and Morty hit its stride quite a while ago, but I do think Season 7 had a couple great episodes and rebounded somewhat well from Season 6. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching. This is Ty the TV Guy signing off.